Primitive just means basic. You can think of like a primitive human being, like a caveman. It just means basic data. And you will not be able to create an application without basic primitive data. So let's take a look at this primitive data. Well, first of all, you have a string. And you can define a string by the double quotes, or you can also define a string by the single quotes as well. Now also with strings, you may need to escape certain characters. What do I mean by escape? It means nullify certain characters. So for example, if I have the double quotes and I said, he said, and then what we typically have is the double quotes to define what somebody is saying. So he said, hello. Now you'll notice here we can see that this part is in red and this part is in red, but this part is black. And what that means is this is actually going to run in JavaScript. And it's actually going to go out there and try to find a variable called hello. And we'll talk more about variables later. But what you have here is you have two strings, one there, and this bit is JavaScript. When you run this, you'll get a syntax error. I'm very sorry, we can't find hello. And also, this is incorrect anyway. You're not concatenating, which means joining together. So this is incorrect completely. It's invalid. So what we need to do is we need to say, right, I don't want to end the string there. So I want to nullify this character. And you do that by placing in a backslash. You need to place that backslash right next to the character you want to escape. So we're escaping this quotation mark character. You also want to do the same here for this quotation mark. And that's it. And there you go. So we have hello, and there it is. We have the hello right there in the string. So you nullify the characters. Also, what you could do is mix and match the quotation marks. As I said, you can define a string by single quote. So you could say hello world, and then you could use the double quotes. Yep, like that. And you'll notice that if we start with a single quotation mark, only an ending single quotation mark can actually end the string. So the double quotation marks here don't affect the single quotation mark. So this is actually good to mix and match the quotation marks. That's why we can define a string with both single and double quotation marks. It just makes it easier for us as programmers. And likewise, it's the same thing in the other way around. Hello world, and then you can have single quotation marks, and single quotation marks cannot escape or break out of the string of a double quotation mark. Nice and easy. The other type of primitive is a number type. Now, please do note with JavaScript, the number type is the number type. However, there are two types of numbers. You have whole integers, such as 100 or 200 or 1. So these are whole integers. They're whole numbers. They're not fractional, nor are they divided into a smaller section. So also what you can have here is floating point numbers. So these are integers, and then you have floating point numbers, which is fractional numbers like 1.1. It has the decimal place in there, or 100.256. This is again floating point numbers. Again, these are all classed as the number type in JavaScript, but you do have the two different types, whole integers and floats. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Boolean. What does Boolean mean? Well, when you think about Boolean, think of a pool, think of an ocean. When something is Boolean, it floats. And if something is not Boolean, it sinks. And you only have one of the two. It's either going to float or it's going to sink. It's either negative or positive. It's either true or false. So when you define true, you're not defining a string here because you've not got the quotation marks in. If you put the quotation marks in, you've now defined a string. You can see it's highlighted red. But when you actually have just the word true without the quotation marks, you are defining a Boolean, and false, which is also a Boolean. Is it going to float, true, or is it not, false? And that's the only state. It's a light switch. It's either on or off, yes or no, 0, 1, true, false. And that's it. It's either on or off. And that's all that Boolean means. Now you also have other primitive types as well. You have null and undefined. Again, these are not strings because there's no quotation marks there. Now, what do these mean? And these have caused a little bit of confusion. Well, null actually could mean that there is no value assigned. It means that it's empty, it's void, it doesn't have anything. Now, why would you actually want to do that? Well, when we create variables, it will make more sense. But please do note, these are primitive types. Null and undefined mean the same thing. It's undefined, or it doesn't have anything assigned. It's completely empty. It's void of anything, of any value. Totally. So again, we'll come back to this later on of why you would want to do this, but you may want to know if, let's say, you have a variable, and we'll get onto this later, and if it's void, if it actually contains anything. If it doesn't contain anything, it will be null. It's still a value, but it's a value that lets you know there's nothing in there. It's completely empty. Finally, you have the primitive type, which is nan, and you must spell it exactly like this, capital N, lowercase a, capital N. And what this actually means is not a number. So if you wanted to check to see if, let's say, a variable or a part of your program has a number stored within it, and let's say if it's not a number, then you will get this primitive type returned. It will tell you, sorry, it's nan, it's not a number. So you know not to use this variable or this value in your mathematical expression, for example. So nan just means not a number. So there are your primitive types. What you have first of all is a string either by single or double quotes. You have integers, which are whole numbers. And you have floating point numbers, which have the decimal place in them. They're fractional numbers. Then also you have Boolean, such as true and false. Next you have null and undefined. And then finally you have nan, which means not a number. There are your basic primitive types. And by using these basic pieces of data, you have primitive data.